is a bewildering thing for a lot of parents when a professional football club, you know, approaches them and says that they spotted some sort of talent or whatever within their son. And I think one of the difficulties we have is that a lot of parents don't know the questions to ask, they don't know, almost in a way, what their rights are, and almost in a way what they're buying into. And if I have one major criticism of the football industry, it's that they surely should have a responsibility in the same way as any other educationalist does, to explain not only what they're doing, but what the parents and indeed the siblings, what their sort of involvement will be when they when boys do get signed to an academy. Now that can be any number of things, but I mean, maybe every boy's dream focuses on some of the things, instances kind of where things have gone wrong, but along the way, what you'll quite often find is that they come from very good clubs, you know, at a grassroots level, and so to pick out, it's difficult to kind of pick out sort of stories, but on the drive down here, I thought most of the parents I connected with came from, they came on recommendation almost from good junior clubs that were pretty much similar to this, where there were good values, and the people at those clubs, you know, they're sort of still friends. I think of a club up in the northeast, smashing club run by a Dutch coach who his sessions were just such fun. And it was the coldest night I can ever remember, you know, actually watching football or seeing it play. It was -9, I think it was, and this was in the tough old northeast. But it was such a fun evening, and afterwards we all went in the clubhouse, and it was a great all-together thing. And a lot of the boys were playing for clubs in the northeast, and there was some sort of, you know, community thing there. But it's then, I think, that's where the professional clubs struggle to carry that through sometimes. And I think of another club in Birmingham, a lovely little club called Callybrook Swift, who again had a super sort of camaraderie amongst the parents and players. I think the professional industry really needs to look at how it works with boys to make sure that it remains fun. I haven't been looking at the stories that have been coming out since then, so I mean, I think when you look at the overall picture and the things that people tell me, I don't think it's got better or worse. I just think it's stagnated. I think it is the state that it is. Until we make it more fun for players. I think coaches are working to a slightly different ethos, then I think we'll continue getting the same results. Because one of the very early things, when the very first book I wrote was about football management, one of the big mantras, one of the coaches, the top managers in the country told me at the time, said, if you always did what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. And I think we're getting like that, to be honest with you. I think a lot of coaches have kind of been trapped in a sort of similar situation. We've had some tinkerings about with things like the elite performance program, but to me, I think it still has to be about kids learning the game. And I actually honestly believe that it should be fun all the way through until it becomes serious when you're 15, 16, and then it shifts to a different level. But to me, sport should be fun when you're at school, right the way through, and I think boys should be playing schools football as well as playing in the academy. I think as long as they're playing football or playing sport, it's positive. Where I have a big issue is boys living in places like Bath being expected to go to the northeast or the southeast or the northwest to go and play 15, 20 minutes worth of football. I don't see how there's a kind of coach ethos about it. It's to become an elite performer, it's anything in life, but let's say it's sport or dance or singing or something like that, that you need 10,000 hours of practice. I don't think you can get anywhere close to 10,000 hours if you're going to spend your weekends travelling 2 or 3 hours either way on a coach. I think you need to be playing sport. And to me, however that's organised and however that's worked around education, as long as that balance is maintained, that's a really important thing. You know, one of the bizarre things I found when I was writing the book was that there's this almost like when some academy teams, you know, are playing away from home, there's not, the club take them on a coach, but the parents can't go on the coach. So as a parent, you take your son to the academy, they go on a coach, and there's almost this flotilla of cars following them behind, going all the way up to Newcastle or whatever. And then you can't fraternise. You can bring them back, that was it, you can bring your kids back. But then, of course, the kids who, sadly, there will be some who don't have parents who can go there. So they're the ones coming back on the coach, aren't they? How do they feel? So it's a lot of things like that I just think are badly ill thought out. And it's all about competition, and it's all about trying to satisfy. We talk about long-term things there when we were saying about it's a long-term vision. Unfortunately, you have people running football clubs who sometimes only have a short-term vision, and that is the length of time they're sat in the chair. And if it harms their ego when they see the results they're put on their desk on a Monday morning, and the under-10s have lost, they see that as a problem for the image of the club, rather than thinking, actually, it's the development that's important, it's the long term. It's where these boys are going to be in 10 years' time that really matters. And so for me, the important thing is that boys are actually spending their time playing quality sport, enjoying it, enjoying the environment. Now, if that means kids being there away from school for a day, all of these school week, that's a difficult one, isn't it? Personally, not a huge fan of that, because as long as we're tracking the way these kids perform at other subjects as well, that's surely as important as anything else. But obviously with anything, if you have a school trip out somewhere, you will find out more about history. If you're going, I don't know, for a day out in London, you go to some museums. So you have to accept there's always going to be a trade-off with different areas. I think football clubs coming in and having an influence on the school curriculum, unless it's blended in, like there are one or two schools around the country where this has been tried out. Harefield is one place in London, in Watford involved. I'm not sure that scheme's still running at Scotland, I think. It's hard to fund as much as anything else, but there they had the academy, the sports education, if you like, was built around the school day, so the school day was longer, but some of the football training was actually in the school curriculum, and it was a longer day. But everything was done and dusted for the kids by 6 o'clock. They weren't going out in the evening to go and play, you know, so-called serious football. So there are many ways it can work out, Tim, but as long as, you know, as long as everything is maintained in a balance, because even if you are in a football academy, the sad fact is, and we want to inspire all these boys to go on and be the best they can, the sad fact is there's only a few hundred of them can play for our clubs each weekend. The vast majority, sadly, will not make it. They will sort of fall football-wise by the wayside. But you know what? That's the same with everything in life. It's the same with all, you know, you're not all going to become historians, you're not all going to become top mathematicians, you're not all going to be masters of English and end up writing books and be lecturers. There's a number of things that you'll do in life. Sport just filters into that, but it should be something for these boys to look back on as the best days of their life. And I think if they're in the football academies, that's exactly what it should be. They were in the best facilities, they had the best days of their life, and I think that's what we need to work much more towards, rather than thinking, should we be taking them out of school? And what are they going to do? Are they going to develop as people? Are they going to develop as sports people? Or are they there to get results for a professional football club? I have a great problem if it's the final one of those two. If it's the other ones, I don't know too much about. Yes. I mean, in essence, of course, it has to be the first two you would always have to say would be the parents and the school teacher. But I think the club also has a huge, huge responsibility not to become a distracting factor there, and to work with properly with school teachers, but also to understand what it is that parents are going through. you know, the classic thing people in football say to you is, oh yeah, but this happens with children who go to RADA. Yeah, there's one RADA in the country. You know, there's 92 professional football clubs, all with you know, academy players. Sometimes, if you took development centres, you took from the age of sort of 6 up to 19. So there's a complete difference there in terms of their involvement and their role within the game. I think they're poor at working with parents quite often. I think they're very good at working with parents of players they really want, which is maybe the one in each team, or 2 in each team. The Wayne Rooneys of this world, they're less good at dealing with the ones who, as they would see it, and this is sadly how they do view it, the ones who make up the numbers. The player can't play on his own, he needs others around him. So Wayne Rooney, when he's growing up at Everton or whatever, he needs those other boys around him to make up the team. Now, a very obvious logic to say that is, well, don't have so many in the system, double up the age groups as you would in education, or if you're playing in the field parks or whatever, you don't have everybody, you know, a full team at every age level. That to me was one of the weaknesses about when they revamped the academy system, was to have far too many boys involved, far too many parents who, if you like, would be misled. But it should be a tripartite system. And I think the other people who get left out are also the brothers and sisters of boys who are in academies as well, because parents often have to balance a range of needs. And the other children's needs, you know, are equally valid if you're a parent, aren't they? You know, just because you're taking one child to go and train with, say, I don't know, a Premier League football club, you can't ignore the other children. But if the demand is to do that awful weekend trip I'm talking about, once a fortnight, but it could be anywhere in the country, and then, you know, you've got to take them to training 2 or 3 times a week. What about the other kids in the family? Do you also equally look after them? So I think parents are put in a difficult, but a unique position, I would say. If the clubs were a bit more understanding of that. I think teachers often are put in a position by the clubs, to be honest with you, where they're almost undermined, I feel, at times. And certainly that's what they tell me. And there's also an imbalanced relationship. So it has to be a proper relationship. I think if there's a way forward with this, I think, you know, there's an idea that myself and some other folks are working on, and that's because I think the biggest unsung army of people in British sport are you guys, the parents, the players. Because you are the people who make this game happen. I mean, you know, Tim's a coach, I've been a coach. You know, without parents, there's absolutely no game in this country. And I think that what we need is a parent supporters club. I think there needs to be an organisation that solely advises parents whose children, not just involved in sport, in football, but other sports as well, and possibly other areas of similar to this, like dance or whatever. People who can advise and support parents, because they're going through a unique situation. You know, nobody tells you how to do this stuff. You know, you have to learn as you go along. And what I would say is, you know, we talk about how did you get involved in this subject, and you know, it was the result of many radio programmes, but probably the proudest one I ever did was when I used to be on Radio 5 Live. I was a sports investigative reporter. So my job at the time was to delve into serious issues and put 2 or 3 hours worth of programming together, usually in the evening. And we had an ideas meeting one day, and we were talking, and I had this idea that we should do something about grassroots sport, grassroots football. In particular, you know, there's a few issues going on. We kind of touched on them so far, I guess. And I just threw out the question. This was a Monday night slot we were talking about. And I said, well, I just posed the question, who's our audience on Radio 5 Live that time of night? I said, it's people who like Premier League football. No, they like Premier League football if that's what you play to them. I said, and that only works if Sky TV is showing games on a Monday night. They aren't at the moment. So, who's our audience? And I said, well, we lose people when they're sat down in front of TV. I said, exactly. What are our audience doing? I said, they're in the car. I said, yeah, where are they going? To and from sports centres. Who are they? Their parents. Why don't we talk to them? Why? And that particular evening, we played some clips to lead the evening off, and we were deliberately long. It was, deliberately just voices coming in and out for about 7 minutes, I think it was, which is very, in radio times, that's a kind of a long period of time without a presenter jumping in and saying lots of words and stuff. So we played that. Within the opening few minutes of a few questions being asked, I was there in the studio that night. The email system crashed at 5 Live because there were so many people trying to get in touch. So many people saying, do you know what they were ultimately saying? You're talking to us at last, and we're listening and we're responding. And that was a fantastic thing. And I think this is what the voice that gets unheard but should be heard are all you guys who are out there. You're ferrying your kids backwards and forwards. You may be playing with yourself. You're on the way to a sports centre, on the way to play five-a-side, whatever it is. You're the army of people who are out there. And I don't think football or any of the other sports do anywhere near remotely enough to talk to you guys and listen to your concerns and address your concerns. And until we get the attitude right with the parents and the school teachers feel bad, but also some of those academy coaches who also work their socks off, by the way. Sometimes it's very easy to say, oh, it's the coaches, but sometimes they're lumbered as well, you go down the football leagues and some of them are not on great money, some of them are fighting for their jobs, some of them don't have long-term, job prospects, and they don't feel particularly loved. So we need to get that relationship right, but I think it needs to come. We need good people in charge at the top, but we need people who are working together lower down. And if there's one thing I think we can do, it's support the parents with that. About communications, I think it's something that is now starting to filter much more into FA courses for coaches, that they improve their communication skills. But there is a thing without a doubt there, and you hear this over and over again. You see, you asking a question, to most people in the room, you asking a question of a coach is a dead right thing for a concerned parent to show, isn't it? That you would expect that, wouldn't you? You'd expect somebody who cares for their child to be able to ask a question. How's he getting on? What's happening? To some coaches, and this is the mindset I think that needs to be got across, is you're undermining my authority in front of everybody, and I'm not going to answer your questions. And by the way, I think you lot, the parents, are a problem. That's effectively the line of communication. Now, something is wrong there. I've had this with my own son. Of all things, my son was bullied in the club that he was at, largely because I've written this book, and largely because the coach in charge couldn't deal with a question. If you asked him why, and this is a club where you're supposed to have an ethos of all the boys supposed to be rolling subs, they all play equal time. So why is my son on the sidelines most of the time, and your son actually never ever misses a single minute? Now, the answer to that wouldn't be, gosh, I haven't noticed that. Is it really March already and going into the season, and my son's never played anywhere but up front in the team? Christ, thank you for pointing that out to me. To him, he's hearing, you're undermining my authority, I'm going to, well, actually in this case, I'm going to make lots of things about you and your son. But, you see, it's about whether or not people can handle that communication. Yeah.
How does he get it on? That's what I wouldn't know.
But there are stories in the book about one particular parent of a lad who was in an academy at Coventry, and his dad, twice a week was having to, trying to get him there at 6 o'clock, leaving his job in North Worcestershire, in a town called Redditch, getting back into South Birmingham, very close to Longbridge car factory, which is no longer with us, but a huge car factory. A 6-mile journey, getting back, getting him in the car, grabbing the sandwich and, you know, literally eating it on the way. I don't mean getting in the car, getting the son in the car, getting the food in the car, getting onto the motorway and hoping to get there for 6 o'clock. And sometimes he would fail, and so if he failed, then he wouldn't play at the weekend. But trying to have a conversation with the coach saying, look, this is really difficult for me. You know, this is really, I'm doing my best, but if the motorway's blocked, I'm stuck. Never ever a conversation could be had about it, and the coach was shaking his head before they even started the, you know, have you ever had that sort of conversation with somebody, you know, where you start to say something and they're saying no before, you know, the answer's no, what's the question? And I think too many coaches are like that. They're not empathetic with the parents. They just don't understand them at all. And I think if there's, I do think that the FA are genuinely trying to improve their coaching courses to improve communication. But we've got a long, long way to go. I think we've got a mindset to leap over that says parents have a right to ask questions. A responsible parent would ask that. When you go to your parents' evening at the school, that's exactly what you would do, wouldn't you? You wouldn't sit there dumbstruck, I don't care. You know, you can come in and do what the hell you like, coach your parents, and I'm not going to ask a question. What sort of parent would that be? And yet that's the sort of parent they seem to want. Parents who are compliant are the ones they can work with, and I think it's a problem. I mean, I think that, sadly though, the game encourages a kind of parent that won't ask questions, but will get in the face or get in the ear of somebody. And sadly that does happen in grassroots football as well. I think the Respect programme was a great thing when it was introduced, but to me it's far too patchy. It seems to apply with sensible parents, so you're kind of almost like you're making the rules up for the people who always stay by the rules. The people who overstep the mark, especially when you have any action taken at grassroots level, it's hard to police, hard to manage, and you'll never stop some of these folks. I mean, I spent days going out as a journalist with referees, because, the amount of tax on referees and this kind of thing. And, one guy was taking me to a place in Country, I think it was, and we're just watching these routinely parents on the pitch. And you kind of say, well, look, you've got to come over here. But routinely, once they stand there, you can't stop them. You can put all the respect barriers up you want with decent people and decent clubs and all the rest of it. But if you've got people who are just routinely behaving badly, but those are the ones, funny enough, I think some of the football clubs will get on better with. They kind of like people who share their own values and can't deal with people who ask questions. But that thing of players being nervous, this is where the game, if it's serious about developing players, needs to make sure that it's an environment that isn't nervous.
It was terrible, really, to see. It was terrible, and I feel guilty putting it for us as well.
I think a lot of parents do feel that way, but it's the hardest thing in the world I can imagine, to pull your child out of an academy, because it's where most boys want to be. It's every boy's dream, the name of the book. It's what every boy wants to do, and and don't get me wrong, I think for a lot of people it is a very fulfilling experience, and I think, I'd say a lot of coaches do work very hard at making it a good environment. The trouble is there are far too many out there who, I'm afraid, just routinely behave like that, and they don't spot those nervous signs. I just genuinely do feel that is the way it is for a lot of parents. It's a difficult thing to handle. It's the one thing you're probably only ever going to happen to you once as a parent as well, isn't it? And that's why for the coaches, they see this a lot more than you do, because it's your one and only time. And it's up for them to me, the responsibility, almost like this with school teachers, is to be able to guide and manage that situation, and understand, that actually some overzealous parents do need pulling back a little bit. Some parents who are a bit too quiet maybe do need a bit more advice, but it's about what is appropriate in each case for me. And that's where I think we need a bit more intellectual rigour added to the old system, because that's the one thing that we really do struggle with, is boys love football, girls love football, but it's this idea that you've got to give it everything at the expense of something else is just nonsensical. If you look at the foreign players who come to England, you have a look at the way they do interviews, you have a look at their lifestyle in many cases, they're far better tuned than a lot of our homegrown players. And you have to say, if you ever observed life in an academy away from the football, you realise that they actually just play lip service to the idea of education. And it should be something that goes hand in hand, because an intelligent, well-balanced, confident young boy will be has got a better chance of being a great footballer. Somebody who's nervous, who develops, nervous patterns, who puts his education on the back burner, if it's there with any priority at all, is always going to struggle against somebody who's smarter, I'm afraid. And I think that's a balance of the game we've got to get right. But that comes back to educating the coaches, it comes back to supporting the parents, and it comes back to, I really do believe this, to actually allowing school teachers to also have some input in this as well. I mean, the number... Okay, in this sort of conversation, in this sort of context, the only school teacher I would have spoken to will be people who will be somewhere in the line with that. But whether it's a principal at a further education or college or at a university, or whether it's a sports teacher, they will tell you a very, very similar story. And that is that they feel undermined by the people that are involved in football. And that's not true. A lot of the individual sports, you have to realise it's a different thing. It's not this team sport, and nobody's doing it on the scale of football. I mean, you're talking about a system which has 10,000 boys in.
I'd say more now.
Sorry?
I'd say even more now.
Oh, well, those are the ones you can find the statistics about. That's 9 to 18. When you go, they have what they call development centres for younger boys, and they don't even keep tracks of the numbers. We don't know who they are. They won't tell you. They're never registered. So, I think you can possibly even double it in reality. So you may be talking about 20,000 boys. Now, with all due respect, it's just you can't compare any other sport with it. The one that I did was rugby union, because obviously if you start to look at what happened with rugby union, it became a sport that got professionalised in the 1990s, but also set up a Premier League and around a similar time, and also got, like the English Football Premier League, got itself into a lot of financial trouble very quickly, because owners came in, thought this was only ever going to be the land of milk and honey, and then got the fingers burnt. Some of them very well-known business people, aren't they? Like Richard Branson and people like that, who will always tell you everything they've ever done is marvellous. Anyway, not so in rugby. Anyway, a guy called Stuart Lancaster was the guy who was in charge of youth development at the time. Now, obviously, he's the head England coach. But Stuart is somebody who we haven't got an equivalent of it in football. A very, very intelligent person from a playing background, a university background. I'm aware I am in Bath. We're in Rome. The nearest we're not yeah, but he is, for whatever, I know England have lost, what is it, £500 or whatever. But I still think he's a different type of national coach, and he'll get it right in some sort of way. And he's had to change a men's ethos that was definitely there at the top of rugby union, but different in terms of anybody else who's involved with the football academy system in this country. And I think a lot of the things that he implemented when he was in charge of youth development and acknowledging the problems and dealing with them, I think we're probably going to start seeing better academies within rugby union than we've got in football. Not necessarily, I mean, you can always have issues about, the production of talent and, who will win what. But I mean, in terms of, those players being looked after and being, having proper education opportunities and all that stuff. It's sort of a slightly different sport, because obviously it is more middle class, and the players do, the academies go on for longer in rugby, because to specialise in certain positions, that doesn't happen until you maybe into your mid-20s. But it's the nearest comparison we have in this country, I think, and the approach is different. And I believe that, Stuart Lancaster, fought hard actually at the time to implement a lot of things that I wish we had in football. But that's the nearest comparison I can come up with, really. You know, I think a bit of openness and honesty wouldn't go amiss sometimes, you know. I think a lot of boys will say they're happy because they want their parents to be happy.
And
I think a lot of
they're happy because they're in that situation.
And the parents have to say they're happy, don't they? Because you know, and the coaches have to tell them that they're doing well. Because if they tell them they're not doing very well, they won't play very well, will they? So everybody's lying, really, at the moment. And that's a poor example for children, I would think. You know. So I think you know, to me, it just is about just making it just lightening the thing up a little bit at times, you know, making it a bit more fun. I mean, there's one, you know, I can't think of a worse example of parenthood in some respect. Well, I think it was in this context, and from a role from a football club was one story that I came across of a 9-year-old boy who was travelling from, I can't reveal the details, but it was one very big city to another very big city in England, about 100 miles apart. And he was doing this, I mean, there were, I don't know if you know, but there were rules introduced that, you know, that you can only travel up to an hour up to the age of 12, and then an hour and a half to attend an academy between the age of 12 to 16. And that's to save you from having to travel ridiculous journeys. I mean, clubs do find their way around it. They'll move parents, and some will even argue that actually this time thing, that you could get a jet from, you know, you could get a plane from Exeter to Newcastle, and that would count. But that's assumed down the road. But anyway, this boy's travelling 100 miles to get to train between two big cities on a notoriously busy motorway. There's very little alternative to get there, and the club, to get around the rules, and this is a 9-10-year-old boy we're talking about, told him he must play under a false name, so they're introducing him to lying. His parents, by the way, his dad, a former professional footballer, is also complicit with this. And he was too tired to go to school the next morning sometimes because how hard the training was. But he wouldn't admit it. You know, why would he? You know, he didn't want to admit to his dad that he was tired. He was trying to do homework on the way into, on the motorway, trying to eat on the motorway, having mornings off the next day, and the parent going to the school teacher and saying, yeah, but this really matters because he's going to be a good footballer, which they're all told, obviously. And I can't think of a worse example, really. I mean, when the club got found out because the coach, by mistake, put his real name down on a form, and that's how they got fined £5,000, and this is about as big a Premier League club as you can imagine, by the way. And you just think, when you see things like that, you just do wonder what planet these people are really on. But the kids, it should be just lightened up, you know. That's my way. Well, the data for academic institutions, for universities or whatever, this is one of the big things. You try getting the data from the football industry, they won't let you have contact details or anything to do with boys who have been released. They don't do any research themselves on players. The moment you've served your purpose with them, that's it. You're persona non grata. They don't. So it's very difficult to track what happens to these. And indeed, you know, in our Everybody's Dreams, there was one joker who was going around for one of these. He's found all the bad stories out there. I said, well, I've got news for you, mate. So, I ain't that good. I'm not that good to have found the only ones out there. I said, and these aren't stories that lead you, you know, like in every walk of life, there's somebody will say a story, won't they? Hey, you won't believe this, you know. Well, that wasn't how these stories came about. They were just things that I came across or whatever. It wasn't as if these were the only examples. So the answer to your question is, what happened? Like 3 or 4 times now, in the period of time that the academies have been running, they've tried to get a new body to deal with youth development, and every time they all fall out with each other, and that's because the Premier, you know, what you've got in this country at the moment is a very unusual system in sport. You've got a league that is genuinely, palpably more powerful than the association that is supposed to be governing it. And while you've got that state of play, you've got absolutely zero chance of getting harmony across the way. Because whenever the FA try to introduce anything, the Premier League throw their wallet on the table and say that's what counts most in this country. And that's where you have the problem. So, you know, every time they form a new quango, it falls apart. And, you know, there are a lot of very good people involved in youth development. There are a lot of people with a lot of experience. But you speak to some of these guys, and I mean, some of them have been great youth developers for 20, 30, 40 years. They've developed great players. I mean, you look at somebody like, for example, Tony Carr at West Ham. He fielded England's squad for the 2010 World Cup. A third of them had come through his academy. Do they listen to people like Tony Carr? No. Do they listen to Dave Parnaby at Middlesbrough? No. Do they listen to Daniel Grady at Crewe Alexandra? No. What too often happens is you've got suits who sit around the table who are far removed from academia, and they're certainly far removed from coaching. And while you've got that state of play, in terms of trying to get harmony and some sort of intellectual rigour together, I'm afraid you're completely wasting your time. And that's the big problem. And when I was writing Every Boy's Dream, the latest one they were doing at the time was fallen apart, because the guy who was the architect of the Chart for Quality, which was the document that brought all this in, Howard Wilkinson was the former manager of Leeds United. For the umpteenth time, we've been asked to come back in and try and chair an organisation where they get some meetings, and they couldn't even agree on the terms of agreement, let alone what they were going to talk about. And that's the problem you've got. I do believe things will change. I do believe that in time it has to change. But you know what? I think the people who should be having a real big say are you guys. I think, you know, for far too long, people at grassroots sport, people who, parents who take their children, listening to some of the kids wouldn't go amiss either sometimes as well. You know, I think until that voice is heard and that voice is brought around the table, we haven't got enough chance, I don't think, to develop I think the players the game deserves, you know, as a whole, because there is no passion for sport anywhere else in the world, I think, like there is for English football. And you've only got to go to other countries to see how much they love our game. But what we don't like is what's happened to our game in terms of this. I think that's the one area where we're kind of lagging behind, ironically.
It is 8:30, so I know people have got to shoot off. I'll be around for a while. I know, Chris, have you got 20 minutes to hang around? So if people do want to ask questions or just come and have a little chat, then we will be here. But just looking at these five in front, they're just really keen to do that moment.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll sort of wrap it up on a formal sense, and we'll be around. But I'd like to thank Chris for coming down. I know he's come a long way. So you can give him a round of applause.